Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles, and on this episode we're doing It Came From the Network. Topic of this It Came From the Network, WCW Hog Wild 1996. Now a little bit of backstory on the pay-per-view. It's the first of what would be known as Road Wild after this, and it's roughly a month after the NWO, Hogan turning to the NWO. It's so soon after that in all of the promotional information, the posters, and even the VHS, still had Hogan in the red and yellow. So we're going to go right into this. If you haven't seen my videos before, I grade everything on a 1 to 5 scale. 1 is the worst, 5 is the best. And I forgot to mention, I did put a post up on my community page asking everybody what decade they'd like to see me review a video from, and the 90s won by a landslide, as you can see right here. That's why I picked this, because it's a video from 1996. If you're paying attention to the community page, I do like to put posts up there. Sometimes I'll just ask straight up, what do you want to see me review? Sometimes it's because I have a mental block. Sometimes it's because I like to engage. I like to give you guys what you want. But anyway, with that being said, let's jump right in. Again, if you haven't seen this before, I grade everything on a 1 to 5 scale. 1 is the worst, 5 is the best. We start off with Dusty Rhodes, Bobby the Brain Heenan, and Tony Schiavone, who are going to be our commentary team for the night. All of them are in their best/worst biker gear. Dusty looks to be wearing jean shorts and cowboy boots. It kind of almost feels like and I don't want to say this in a bad way, like a leather daddy bar that they walked into. Like a Village People, I guess, would be a good reference, especially for those people who are ancient like myself. From that, we go to our first match of the show for the Cruiserweight Championship. Rey Mysterio Jr., going by Jr. at the time, going up against the Ultimate Dragon, which they were still calling him the Ultimate Dragon at this point. They hadn't fixed it and adjusted to his actual name, the Ultimo Dragon. Ultimo had Sonny Ono. I will refer to him as Ultimo because it's just what I know him more as. Ultimo has Sonny Ono with him as his manager, who he would be most of his WCW run. I thought this was a really fun match, and it kind of showed where we were as a wrestling business. Even though the NWO just happened, this was a very casual crowd, and they didn't really respond to this the way that you would think a wrestling crowd would. You know, Mysterio and Ultimo Dragon, both when they're both relatively young. I think Mysterio was like 21, 22 here, and Ultimo was probably either around somewhere between 27 and 30 here. Both were very young still and very athletic, and two of the guys that would define the cruiserweight division in WCW. They got almost no response from the crowd, almost like an apathy going on there. Mysterio does pick up the win on this one. I thought it was a good match. I'm giving it a 4. Next up, we have Scott Flash Norton going up against Ice Train. This was a match of two former partners. They had a fire and ice tag team for a little while. This was a hoss fight, and I like Norton. I'm going to preference by saying that. I love a lot of Scott Norton matches, especially his New Japan stuff in the era. This match was bad. I don't want to lay it all on the feet of Ice Train because I've seen him have good matches as well. I don't know if it was an aspect of sometimes when you put two big guys against each other, it just doesn't work well. The styles are too similar. Again, it was just something felt off about it. Norton does pick up the win here. Probably my least favorite match of the show. I'm giving that one a 2. Now going from that, we get a recap with Ric Flair talking about how the NWO had jumped Arn Anderson and beat up Arn Anderson, which is a recurring thing. They talk about this here because Flair on, I believe it was, they said Tuesday or Thursday, they were going to air a Clash of the Champions, which, okay, I get promoting that here, but let's concentrate on the matches at hand. Flair has an important match here. Hulk Hogan has an important match here. Their match at Clash of the Champions should be secondary to what's going on here. Not a bad interview because it's Ric Flair, and I don't think I've ever seen him have a bad interview. So it was good for what it was, but just a little nitpicking on my end. Next up, we have Medusa going up against Bull Nakano. Nakano has Sonny Ono with her. Medusa comes out on a Harley decked out in red, white, and blue. Sonny Ono rides out a Honda that's painted like the Japanese sunburst flag. It was pretty obvious they were pandering to USA versus Japan here. This, to me, I mean, it's a classic matchup. These two women have put on classic matches in different companies all across the world. I honestly want to say that this is my least favorite Bull Nakano versus Medusa match, and it's mostly because of the end. At the end, we have a weird double pin situation where Medusa gets her shoulder up, but even the commentary team's confused, and it's not until afterwards where we see Sonny Ono trying to destroy Medusa's motorcycle, only for Medusa to get the sledgehammer from him and break the plastic pieces off of his Honda motorcycle, which the crowd ate up, even though probably a good 20% of the people there drove in on a Honda, because not everybody owns a Harley, and Hondas are not bad motorcycles. And if you're a motorcycle enthusiast and I'm saying something out of turn, let me know here. But from what I understand from the motorcycle riders I know, Hondas aren't looked at as unfavorably, maybe with the guys and women that are Harley Davidson purists, but I don't think they're looked at as badly as they portrayed it here. To that crowd, maybe, because it seemed like a very Harley-centric crowd, so maybe, I don't know. If you're, like I said, if you're a motorcycle enthusiast more so than I am, let me know down here in the comments. I know some people that have had both Hondas and Harleys, so that's why I'm assuming it's not that big of a deal. Anyway, Medusa is determined the winner. I'm giving that one a 3. Next match, we get a guy that I like to preface every time he comes up. We're going strictly on his body of wrestling work, nothing to do with his life and the end of his life. The Crippler Chris Benoit versus Dean Malenko. Chris Benoit has Woman and Elizabeth with him. This was when Woman and Elizabeth were tied in with the Horsemen. This match was pretty good. I really liked it. Obviously, you got two of the better in-ring workers of the generation, Dean Malenko and Chris Benoit, two fantastic wrestlers. I absolutely loved everything they did wrestling-wise, especially Benoit. And one of the reasons why I preface it every time is Benoit at one point was one of my favorite wrestlers. And what he did at the end is so horrifying that it kind of makes me angry when I have to talk about him in a positive light. This was a really good match. It goes to the time limit. The referee says, give us an overtime, a 5-minute overtime. That goes to the time limit, so they go into a second overtime, which ends up with basically Malenko gets distracted by the women for Benoit to pick up the win. I'm giving this one a 4. I thought it was really good. One of the better matches of the night. Again, I don't think you were going to put these two in this time frame in a ring and not have a good match. I mean, like I said, they were two of the best wrestlers in the world at the time. Now, going from that, we get a tag team championship match. We have Harlem Heat with Sherry Martel and Colonel Rob Parker going up against the Steiner Brothers. This was my favorite match. I'm a big fan of the Steiner Brothers, a big fan of Harlem Heat. I think they're two, if not the two best tag teams in WCW history. Two of the 3 best tag teams if you throw in the Outsiders as well, or maybe even Sting and Luger. But just during the WCW run, not talking about Jim Crockett, I think they're the two that stand out to me head and shoulders above the rest. I really enjoyed this match. Now, it's not what you would consider a technical masterpiece. It's not on, the mat level of Benoit Malenko. It's not on the high-flying level of Mysterio and Ultimo Dragon. But for what it was, you had 4 really good wrestlers that put on a really good pro wrestling match. And what I mean by that is, whereas Benoit and Malenko can have a match like, if you were to compare it to now, it would be like Bryan Danielson and Zack Sabre Jr. Whereas Harlem Heat versus Steiner Brothers would be more akin to like CM Punk versus MJF. It's a little bit of a different style. I tend to like the style of Harlem Heat and the Steiner Brothers, that style match. Not saying I dislike the Benoit Malenko style match, but the style of match that they put on is more of a classic pro wrestling match. So much so that at the end, the Harlem Heat picks up the win when Sherry throws powder. First she hits Stevie Ray with the powder, then she hits Scott, and then Colonel Parker hits Scott over the head with a cane for the win. Like I said, this is my favorite match of the show. Harlem Heat does pick up the win. I'm giving this one a 5. I really enjoyed it. Next up, we have Ric Flair versus Eddie Guerrero for the U.S. Heavyweight Championship. Ric Flair has Woman and Elizabeth with him as well. Again, like I said, they were part of the Horseman entourage at this point. This was a match I remembered, and I remembered it being really good, and it was really good. And it kind of makes you wonder why WCW never really went with Eddie Guerrero. You could see it here. He has it. He has everything you would want in a star. Even this crowd, which seemed to know Ric Flair and not know Eddie Guerrero as much, by the end of the match, they were cheering for Eddie Guerrero. And by the way, I forgot to mention, for a mostly dead crowd, Steiner Brothers got an amazing reaction, and we'll talk about some other reactions later on. Most of the matches, the crowd was dead, but anyway. I digress. This was a really fun match. I mean, we got two of the great wrestlers of all time, Ric Flair and Eddie Guerrero. Rick does pick up the win here. I'm giving this one a 4. I thought it was pretty good. Next up, we get an interview with Jimmy the Mouth of the South Hart and the Giant talking about his defense of the World Championship later on against Hulk Hogan, or Hollywood Hogan at the time. So yeah, pretty good promo by a guy that's only less than a year into his pro wrestling career. Again, much like I said with Eddie, how WCW dropped the ball on him, the Giant, aka the Big Show, it's kind of funny how great he could have been. Now, I'm not saying that he didn't have a great career. He's a first ballot surefire Hall of Famer whenever WWE is going to put him in. There's no question about that. But he's a what could have been. His talent, he was so talented. He was good on the microphone for someone being like basically a monster, and the fact that even in WCW he switched heel to face so many times, it kind of ruined anything he had. He's really a great what if, in my opinion. If the Giant or Big Show would have been treated properly, what could have been? Could he have been the next Andre the Giant? I feel like at this point he was well on his way to it. I feel like he definitely got derailed by the constant flipping back and forth. And not to say that that's not valuable, that it's not valuable to have a guy that can play both heel and face effectively. It's just the amount of times he switched and kind of ruined it for everybody. Next up, we get a tag team match. The Outsiders, Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, going up against Lex Luger and Sting. This was a fun match. I wanted to like it more, to be honest with you. I love the Outsiders as a tag team. I love Luger and Sting, especially during this run. This was pre-Sting turning into the Crow, but he had already let his hair grow out and let it get a little darker. This was a good match. The thing that took away from it, in my opinion, at the end, there's a ref bump with Nick Patrick, which causes him to clip Lex Luger, which causes them to match. I feel like that took away from the ending more than it added. We would know eventually that Nick Patrick was the NWO referee and would cheat for them. I feel like you should have either put the Outsiders over strong or had WCW pick up a win here. Alas, it was a good match. I wouldn't say it was a great match. I'm going to give this one a 3. Last but not least, the main event for the WCW Championship, Hollywood Hulk Hogan versus the Giant. This match, I liked it. It's a lot better than their match was, I believe it was Halloween Havoc when Giant debuts, and it was a lot better than a lot of the matches the two of them had with each other. But if you're going back, and Giant had an extreme amount of talent, and this is not a knock on Hogan at the time, or Hogan at all, but if you look at Hogan's matches at this time frame, it kind of felt like he was done, like he had already passed his expiration point. His matches weren't great. His stories were fantastic as part of the NWO, especially right here. This was a good match. The Outsiders get involved, but the Giant thwarts them. Eventually, Hogan picks up the win by hitting the Giant in the head with the title. After the match, we see the Booty Man, aka Brutus Beefcake, come out, and he offers Hogan a cake because it's Hogan's birthday, and it's very well teased that he's going to join the NWO. This is what I was talking about earlier with Ric Flair. Hogan starts talking about Arn Anderson being Ric Flair's best friend and Booty Man being his best friend. I keep wanting to call him Brutus. If I call him Brutus, just go with it. Booty Man is fully thinking that he's going to be part of the NWO. Hogan finally says, and it's so telegraphed at this point, he finally says, "Get 'em, boys," and the Outsiders attack him. Hogan attacks him. They go over to the cake, which has a present sticking out of it. They pull out the present. It's a spray paint, and this is where we get the famous NWO being spray painted on the belt. Good match. I'm gonna give it a 3. Not great, not anything other than a little bit of historical significance with the belt getting painted and Hogan winning the championship. Not something I would ever care to watch again. Overall, I thought this was a pretty good show. It was better than I thought it was going to be going back to it. The Cruiserweight match was amazing. Benoit Malenko was really good. Flair and Guerrero was really good. Harlem Heat and the Steiners I really liked. There was a lot to like on the show. Some like a little bit lackluster. Norton and Ice Train. The women's match, which I've seen them both have better. This is not a knock on them. The Outsiders were Sting and Luger. and Hogan versus Giant were a little bit underwhelming. Overall, I'm going to give it a 3. I probably would lean towards like a 3.25, 3.5, to be honest, but I'm going to go with a 3 because the crowd was bad during it, and and that's another thing I wanted to bring up. They were cheering Hogan because it's somebody they knew. Got to remember, this is mostly casual fans that got into an event for free that probably only remember Hulk Hogan from his WWE days, and him dressing in black makes them think, okay, Hogan's a biker now, which plays right to their strong point. Again, I'm giving the show a 3. The crowd was bad during the night. Some of the matches didn't live up to expectations. Some of the matches were better than I thought they were going to be. But all in all, just a middle-of-the-road pay-per-view. While that being said, let's smash that like button, share the video, subscribe if you haven't, and if you made it all the way to the end, give me a 2 sweet at the end, because the NWO is for life. My name is George Coles, and this has been another episode of It Came From the Network.